Hello everyone, Rosa here. Today I'll show you how to make a simple sourdough bread. The night before you make your bread, you should mix 20 grams of ripe active sourdough starter with 80 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. Leave the mixture covered for 10 to 12 or even 16 hours. I show you here the starter next morning that is ready. We add 375 grams of white all-purpose flour, 50 grams of wholemeal flour and of all of the starter, and 230 grams of water. You can mix the dough with hands or with a stand mixer until the dough forms. Then we cover it and leave for 20 minutes for up to an hour for the dough to rest. Then we add the salt and form a firm and maybe a slightly sticky dough. It takes about 7 to 10 minutes for me to mix it by hand. Then we put some olive or other type of cooking oil in our bowl and just spread it nicely. Put the dough in and leave for an hour and 15 minutes in a warm place. Then we have to gently stretch and fold the dough to create a firm structure of the dough, so later it is easier for us to form a loaf. Folding and stretching is simply taking the further part of the dough and stretching it and folding it on top of itself, then picking the part that is closest to us and folding it onto itself. Then picking, stretching one side and folding, and then doing the same from the other side. You can see I'm doing it a number of times because the dough was stickier and softer than I wanted, and I wanted to give it a firmer structure. For your information, I am just an amateur baker and do not know all the nitty-gritty of sourdough baking. I just want to share my experience and show you what works for me. In my experience, for successful sourdough baking, you need a ripe, active and very active sourdough starter, which after a new feed of flour and water doubles or triples in its volume. Another important factor is the temperature of the room where the dough will be proofing. If the room is cooler, the sourdough will need more time to proof. You can always use the oven with the light on to create warmer conditions for your dough. If the room is too warm, then you'll need less time to proof your dough. You'll learn to calculate more precise times for your sourdough as your baking experience grows. The time frames given here should work for average room temperature conditions. After this stretch and fold, we'll leave the dough for another hour and 15 minutes. If you have a cooler room, you can give your sourdough an hour and 45 minutes or even 2 hours. Within the given time frame, my sourdough increases in its volume for about 50%. Get the dough out of the bowl on a slightly floured surface and form a loaf. I just fold the edges of the dough into the center, turn the dough ball around and form a round bread or a boulet by gently folding and pushing it towards me. Here I'm repeating the process because at first I picked a bigger basket than I needed, changed my mind and picked a smaller basket. Put the formed loaf into the well-floured basket or a bowl lined with a well-floured cotton towel if you don't have the rattan basket like in the video. Cover with plastic or a towel and let the dough rise for 2 hours, or you can put the sourdough into the fridge for 8 to 10 hours overnight. I put mine into the fridge. 30 minutes before baking the bread, start your oven and heat it to 235 to 240 degrees Celsius. Put one of your oven racks on the bottom shelf of your oven and place a deep pan on the rack. Right before you put the sourdough into the oven, pour a cup of hot water into the deep pan on the bottom of the oven, so the bread bakes with steam. Place the sourdough onto the baking sheet lined with baking paper. Score it to your preference. Put the loaf into the oven and bake for 40 to 50 minutes. The bread that is baked gives a hollow sound when tapped on its bottom. Wrap the sourdough into a cotton towel and leave to cool on a rack. Bon appetit! If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so.